Please welcome President and Chief Executive Officer of Corewell Health, Tina Freese Decker. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Hemlock Semiconductor, A.B. Ghosh. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of First Independence Bank, Kenneth Kelly. President and Chief Executive Officer of Siebert, Williams, Shank & Company, Suzanne Shank. And to moderate the discussion, political reporter for Wood TV 8, Rick Albin.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see you all here. I think you're going to enjoy this next conversation because it's really going to follow the themes of what's going on here at the conference when we talk about the power of and. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here. I know they each have a lot to talk about. But before we get started, it's kind of a moment of personal privilege that I always like to take a minute and recognize the hard work of the folks of the Chamber. The staff of the Chamber have to move heaven and earth to get this all to happen smoothly and seamlessly. And I've been coming for about 2 decades, and they do a great job of it. So I'd like to give a big round of applause to the Detroit Regional Chamber for putting on what is truly one of its type conference here in the state of Michigan. We're lucky to have it. All right, we're also lucky to have the 4 of you here with us. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Tina, I'm going to start with you. I know that you were introduced and everybody heard the title of what you do. I want to know what you and your companies really do. So take a couple of moments and tell me about the broader vision that you have of a very, very big company.
Thank you very much, Rick. So we have a new name, Corewell Health. It is the integration of Beaumont Health and Spectrum Health. Perhaps some of you have seen our billboards. So what we do every day is that we are relentlessly pursuing better health. We have a health plan, Priority Health, that serves 1.3 million members. We're the 3rd largest provider-sponsored health plan in the country, and we're the 2nd largest in the state to our friends, the Blues. And then we have a robust care delivery network where 60,000 physicians, nurses, and other caregivers come every day to take care of our community and to help Michigan be healthy. And that's through our 22 hospitals or over 300 outpatient sites or virtually or through our many community partners. And what we're really focused on is how can we make health simple, affordable, equitable, and exceptional and really improve the health of our great state.
AB, tell me about your company and the expanse of where you go.
Thank you, Rick, for that question. So Hemlock Semiconductor, or HSC as we're known, we connect and energize the world through silicon technology. We manufacture polysilicon, which is the purest man-made substance in the world. And we've been doing this in Hemlock since 1961. Polysilicon is the foundational building block to make semiconductor chips and the solar panels. In fact, polysilicon is the essence of chips and solar panels, like peanut butter is the essence of peanut butter sandwich. You wouldn't get a peanut butter sandwich without without the peanut butter. So, as I said, we've been around since 1961, and Hemlock, which is just west of Saginaw, and we have about 1,400 people. We're just over $1 billion in revenue, and we're the largest producer of polysilicon in the United States. And virtually every device that you have personally at home or anywhere in the world has some form of polysilicon that's been manufactured right here in Michigan.
Thank you. Kenneth, tell me about your business.
Sure. Thanks, Rick, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenneth Kelly, serve as Chairman and CEO of First Independence Bank. We've been around now for 53 years. We were one of the positive outcomes of the 1967 riots. And so to the power of and, those riots happened, and this bank was created to serve that community. And thank you. And the point is that on a daily basis, I think about being sure that our team members have the resources they need to lend and give capital to those who oftentimes can't receive it. And as we talked, I truly believe this, that money is the oxygen of a capitalistic society. And if you don't believe that, ride through a neighborhood that you see pretty roses, green grass, and ride through one where you see boarded up windows. And so on a daily basis, we're thinking about how can we be a last resort lender to those who don't have access to capital.
Suzanne, tell me about your business.
Sure. Siebert Shank is an independent, non-bank investment banking firm. We provide debt and equity origination services to corporations, municipalities. What that means is we help corporations and municipalities access the debt and equity markets as appropriate. We also have an asset management arm. We do M&A work. We also have a private equity fund called Clear Vision that invests with minority and women-owned businesses in underserved communities to help them get that capital that they have not been able to get despite all the great announcements about funds. So we have many, many clients in Michigan, many corporations, Fortune 500 corporations. We count 74 of the Fortune 100 as our clients.
So the reason I wanted to start with that is because, as I expected, you all set the plate beautifully for talking about the passion and the absolute purpose of what it is that you do. And as we take the theme of this conference, the power of and, I want to hear from you and maybe even brainstorm a little bit about what some of the best opportunities are for you within your business or without. You know, it doesn't have to be just focused on that. And Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. And we talked about this. We know that there are not just people here in this room and a great crowd here, but people watching us being broadcast in other places. So what is the best way to promote the spirit of and? I think we all would agree that, and one of the last speakers before the governor, I thought, made a brilliant point, that you can't just, it's this way or it's not, or it's this way and it's not. You have to find and. How do you do that in your business, and how does it help you?
Well, our audience is comprised of leaders, innovators, change makers. We are the essence of change that needs to happen. We're the group that will make it happen in Michigan. And, you know, I know we talk a lot about threats to our society, and we may say it's Russia or Iran or China. It's really us. Until we, as educated, informed citizens, lean in and take action, reach across the aisle to someone you might not normally do so, we're not going to succeed. So that would be my message to the audience. We need to be the catalyst for change, and we got to keep this going after this week. We've got to really push forward, or else we're going to protect our democracy.
And that really is one of the challenges that we face, is taking away all of the good things that you will talk about here in the next half hour and being able to carry them through, make it a practice, not a conversation. Before I leave you, we had a teleconference earlier to talk about some things. And one of the things you talked about that kind of goes along with this is making sure that folks have equity in the access to finances, but also education. And you mentioned that a little bit just now. Expand on the education piece a bit, because I don't want it to be lost in the larger picture of what we have to do. I mean, we are seeing some pretty remarkable announcements, and that we know we're bringing some folks in here and we're creating jobs, but we've got to have a skilled workforce and a skilled future workforce for those jobs.
Yeah, you know, I have been excited about some of the recent announcements. The governor has made education a top priority. We've seen legislators on both sides of the aisles. We know the philanthropic community is leaning in. But, you know, for me, education was the catalyst for everything right that happened in my life. I was raised by an educator, but every opportunity for advancement was another degree, you know, a mentor with, you know, a teacher or someone pushing me along. My first degree was engineering, as an example, and I had said, I want to be a social worker. And my high school counselor said, no, you're good at math and science, you're going to engineering school. So I did. And then I transitioned, you know, to the world of high finance with Wall Street. But it just saddens me to think that every kid doesn't have that opportunity, doesn't have a community, someone who lives in poverty may not be able to learn because they're hungry. And, I know the legislature, I heard Representative Tate speak this morning about expanding, meal service, which is critically important. I bring up education in every discussion because I think it is so critical to our future. It is our future. And I hope that, everybody has kids, grandkids, or, a cousin, that you think about, what do I need to do? What outreach can I do to help this next generation? Because it really is our future.
What a stark example of and, because nobody would say when it comes to education, it's this child, not this child. It's this child and this child.
I was going to say the and is in the data.
Yeah.
Where the state is not doing well in educational attainment. I think we're 37th out of 50. And that's statewide. And I know we often think about southeastern Michigan versus west versus north. Our state is failing in this area, and so.
Kenneth, when you talked about finance, money being the oxygen of a capitalistic society, you said that the other day on the conference call. I wrote it down because I thought nothing could be more true. How do you apply that to and? Because you already talked about with some passion about how you work every day to make sure that the and is making sure folks who don't have resource to capital get it. How does your business employ
Sure.
that?
So I'll jump in on this one. It is fundamental to what we do. And one example of that is even for a bank needs capital. And I'm going to take a moment just to thank Bank of America, because Brian Moynihan and Matt and their team in 2020 made an investment in First Independence Bank. It was the catalyst for a lot of other investments that have taken place. We've raised about $66 million, which is unprecedented for us. That put us in a position to grow. We've been able to move from about $200 million to just last month, crossing over $500 million. That's one and. I'm gonna give you a second and. Looking for capital, I had the opportunity to testify on Capitol Hill in front of House Financial Services. We got two bills passed. They passed 57-0, 52-0. That was when Chairwoman Maxine Waters was chair. And the way we got to the and was we were able to talk about our issues in a way that you could relate to in red state America. And my point is, it's not an either or, as Matt said earlier, it is and. And what has happened out of that is not only were banks like ours in a position to receive capital, but banks in South Alabama, Mississippi, and other places have too. So it's put those institutions in a better footing given the environment that we're in right now, but it's all because of and. If I had said it's just African-American banks or just minority banks, that would have never happened.
AB, let's talk a little bit about that opportunity to get to and. I can only imagine how many companies you work with worldwide. So there's got to be quite a bit of cooperative thinking and talking about how does it apply to Hemlock Semiconductor.
Yeah, I mean, on a wider point, yes, you're right. I've worked all over the world, and to me, as reflecting 30 years career, is that I couldn't get anything done unless it's cliche, I know, but it's a win-win. That's the only way you kind of grow your business. It's got to be what's in for everybody else. So and is always a solution you're looking for. Otherwise, it's a zero-sum game. There aren't any trade-offs. So, in our business, we're fortunate enough right now to live in a time where the secular trends are very favorable for the semiconductor and the solar energy. And so for us, it's investing now. We have to act now, but we also have to think of the long term. Think of the long term in the sense that, the federal, state and federal legislators have passed a lot of industrial policies in the last 12 months, the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which has got climate energy initiatives in it. And those investments are coming like never happened before. But, and we're doing the same thing. We're investing now, we're acting now. However, a capital-intensive business like Hemlock, we have to think of the long term. Mm-hmm. So, our ask would be is that we have a long-term vision for onshoring the supply chain for these industries. And to me, it's a 30 to 40-year endeavor. Doing the CHIPS Act or IRA wasn't great, but to me, that's a down payment. And frankly, we have to have a holistic plan if you really want to be have these supply chains residing back over here. So it's not either or. It's got to be act now and think the long term.
And I'm interested in that long term. 30, 40 years is a long time to get things built back here, but it took us that long to offshore stuff too. So I assume that makes sense.
Right.
You've got a business that changes daily, and from the outside looking in, one of the biggest elements of what's going on is the continuing combination of different resources, such as you were just talking about with the new Corewell. How do you incorporate and how do you do that with a whole new group of hospitals and physicians and medical professionals? There's a lot of I'm guessing, coming along here.
There is a lot of and. And another and is that we have both care and coverage combined. Because we believe that when you look at that integrated approach, we can take care of all your needs as you focus on your health. We need to be focused more on health than treatment. And so we've been asking those next questions about what does that mean. And we're creative and innovative in trying to figure out those solutions. I think back to AB's point, we need to make sure we're thinking about the future and embracing the future and the new frontier of healthcare or of any other industry. And we caught a glimpse of that in the pandemic. We saw what happened when we simplified things, when we innovated them, when we moved at a pace that was just unbelievably fascinating. And we created so many innovations there. I think that's one of our greatest opportunity is to uncomplicate things, to simplify it, and to make sure that we're creating health that is simple and equitable and affordable and exceptional and accessible. It has to be all of those because we're trying to help make sure that we're a healthy Michigan and a healthy country.
Let's talk about a healthy Michigan. There are a lot of things that we discuss at this conference, and they all kind of center around the basic health of the state. It can be economic, it can be actual health, it can be industrial, it can be education, and it can be financial. What do you use? What metrics do you use to kind of gauge the general health of the state? Because that has a bearing on what happens next to your business and everybody else's.
You give me eye contact, so I'm assuming that means
I'm talking, yeah.
So here's what I would say. I'm not going to be religious, but I'm going to be spiritual. To the least of these, and I think the rest of the audience may know the answer to that, is the way you measure that. And to Suzanne's point a moment ago, there shouldn't be a child who has not equal education, but equitable education. And we know that there's data that show that there's disparities along those lines, which produce outcomes that even become wider from a disparity perspective. And so as you ask that question, Rick, I would tell you, I think we have to think about where are those segments we can make changes. An example was a pandemic you just talked about a moment ago. We know at some point there were close to 200,000 kids in the Metro Detroit area who didn't have access to the internet during the pandemic. Their education was stunted by that process. Or they go to McDonald's and try to do it, under the lights. Doesn't make sense. And so my point is, I think to follow up on what Suzanne just talked about is, we have to look at data in such a way that it tells a story, and we decide, and we're going to work on it in such a way that we're going to shift and close some of those gaps.
Expand on that for me, if you would, Suzanne, and talk a little bit about how you assess the metrics. What do you look at when you see, talking about healthy Michigan beyond physical health?
Education I always think about, but GDP. Is our economy growing or shrinking? Are we able to retain our population? Is our population growing? Are we able to keep our top grads from our great institutions, educational institutions, which we know we are not doing as well at? And are we preparing for the future jobs? Our state has always been heavily steeped in the auto industry, and we have a huge opportunity as we transition to EV and renewables. And will we have a workforce to fill those jobs, the skilled workforce? And so I agree with the remarks about investing.
And when you talk about population, it's not just about raw data. It's about who makes up that population.
Right.
I mean, you don't need a whole lot of guys my age because we're not going to be taking those skilled jobs in the future. So you have to be able to maintain, as you say, our current crop of students and those that are graduating from college even in the spring. What about from your perspective, from your business perspective, how do you look at the health of the state and what does it mean for your business?
Well, when I think about the health of the state, population makes a lot of sense to me. From an industry perspective, we're looking at life expectancy, but more specifically, we're looking at infant mortality. And I think infant mortality is a good early indicator of how we're taking care of our population, how we're connecting with mothers, with fathers, with babies. And what my dream is that we have many more babies of every color living to their first birthday and beyond. And through specific programs, we've been able to achieve some of those accomplishments, but we have a long way to go in this state. And it needs to be a concerted effort with a lot of partnerships, which means a lot of ands.
I know, AB, when you talk about the health of a state or the region, what do you use to assess it? Obviously, you have a really big impact. Your footprint in that area of Michigan is really big with the amount of employees. So you have a good opportunity to kind of assess the health of the area.
Yeah, I think, assessing health of areas to see whether people are thriving or not, right? And so obviously we've been there for 60 years. We have a lot of STEM qualified engineers and workers who work at our factory. And we're looking for the next 30 to 40 years, we need to make sure we have the workforce that's, has a STEM background. On a small example, I would say, 2 years ago, we helped, along with other donors, to create a STEM center that services 5 school districts in Hemlock. And it was also the home of the first robotics team that wasn't there before. 2 years later, the place is full, and now we haven't expanded even more. So on a very small level, I do know at least the health is getting, the STEM education is getting a little bit better. But we got to do more. But I'm always an optimist. My glass is always full with me. And so I'm always looking at the bright side of how things are going, and that, with the power and we can get further.
Well, I can tell you firsthand that first robotics competition can get pretty intense sometimes. So congratulations on being part of that. It's fun to watch that and watch these kids as they learn to code and build and engineering. And if you haven't seen it, it's something to behold. I'm going to stick with you for a minute because my second question about this is, what do you do to gauge the health of your own industry? And I want to start with you on this because you talked about it before. But if we have ever heard more about semiconductors or chips than we have in the past year, I don't know when it's been. I mean, every conversation that I've had with elected officials, we've talked about it on my show weekly. You're right in the heart of that, and you alluded to some of the transformation that's going on. What is the health of your industry, and to the degree that you can see down that 30-year timeline, what does it look like going forward?
Yeah, so that's a big question.
Yes,
I say so.
It is.
There are a lot more qualified people than myself, But, we live in a world where everything's powered by semiconductors, and it's going to get even more. So in generative AI and all those things, requiring more and more smaller chips, faster chips. And as people may not know, 90% of chip production resides today in Asia, and actually Taiwan. And so as we saw in the pandemic, the fragility of the supply chain, and that's the reason why the CHIPS Act was passed. But the amount of investment that's going in now, whether it's in the United States or in Europe, is immense. But the reason I say it's a 30, 40-year journey, because it did take 30 years for us to lose that production. And it's going to take us that amount of investment to get it back. But if you take the 5-year, 7-year arc of that industry, it's very, very strong. And this continuous investment going. So I think the health of the industry is good, but it's going to require us to have a long-term vision to get there. One of the things in a business that we dislike when, that things change so quickly from the government side, right? We like consistency because we got to take a long-term view about investments and things. So on that side, I think the health is good. In the solar side, it's the energy of the future. It's the energy now. It's not even the future. It's one of the solutions as we transition. And again, onshoring the supply chain is critical to allow us to have the diversified energy mix that we need in this country. It's not and or, it's not a zero sum. We need both. Fossil fuel, nuclear, wind, and solar. And so I think it's a good trend.
Kenneth, let's talk about the health, the relative health of the financial industry as you see it, or of your business, because we think about it in the and moment to see how healthy your part of the industry is and all of ours. So we kind of get a sense of where we're going when we leave this conference, because whether it's 30 or 40 years or in the next quarter, it's important to know kind of how we're stacking up.
Well, there's a gentleman coming up on stage after this panel who's probably a lot more qualified since he runs a globally systemic banking institution. But I would tell you from my view, the challenge is right now being sure everybody stays and remains calm. What we saw with Silicon Valley, Signature Bank, created a sense of fear that unlike we've seen in a while in the banking system, and let's just get to the brass tacks of that. $42 billion moved out of that institution in one day through Twitter contact, whatever you want to call it, social media. And it was impactful. I had the chance to sit this past week with the FDIC chairman and have some pretty comfortable conversations on that topic. But what I would tell you in my position is we just have to be rational, remain calm in the midst of what's going on now. Those were idiosyncratic business models that they had, and we're seeing that being proven true. So over the long haul, there are hearings going on in Congress right now and dealing with regulatory issues, but I would suggest for the listening audience that's concerned about the banking system, remain calm, because we're in the business of trust, and that's the way that we're going to be able to be sustainable over the long haul. As Suzanne said a moment ago, the threat is really within, and the fear that we saw really created the demise of those two, I would call it, idiosyncratic business models that they have there. From our perspective, again, I think you heard in my opening comments, we're as strong as we've ever been, and we intend to continue to grow. We moved beyond Detroit into Minneapolis. We were invited by 5 institutions into that market, being the first African-American owned and controlled bank in the whole state of Minnesota, but specifically into Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and something we're very proud of. We were invited by those 5 banks to move into that market. And so as I talk about this topic in the industry, I'll say this because it's one of our shortcomings on or. Many times, and I learned this from talking to friends, they hear the term it's a black institution and think that it is for blacks only. I can't say it any better than this. We are black owned, but not black only. So I hope you all got that message. The point is we'd love to have all of you as customers, and as we think about the industry, it is critical to our survival and to the whole community going forward.
And Suzanne, I'll ask you the same question. I assume that you come at it somewhat the same, but you're in a different position. And so how do you gauge the health of where you are, where your group is?
Well, our industry is in a bit of flux. Volatility is the, biggest thing we're dealing with right now in the markets. Any news that occurs impacts the markets. There are very few IPOs getting done right now because of that. The Fed, with the multiple rate increases, rates are much higher than most people remember. I've been doing this 35 years, so I've seen all sorts of rate environments. I would say for our business, it's been a very interesting time of growth since the events of George Floyd. I sat at my desk in my home getting calls almost every day from a new client. And so it really was an opportunity for us to grow dramatically, and we really have. We now have offices in 20 cities. I've had people say, well, you guys aren't still minority owned, are you? because they say that we've grown too much, and you can't be. Someone yesterday told me that some competitors were saying we're no longer majority women-owned because we happen to be majority women-owned as well, because they feel, I guess, we've graduated to a point. And competence has nothing to do with the color of your skin or your gender. I think we are pretty healthy, but I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much room and opportunity to grow still. And, sometimes I think, I've been doing this for many, many years. If it's this difficult for us with the depth of experience, rankings, et cetera, how do other small businesses grow? And so, I'm on a few corporate boards. I'm on several other not-for-profit boards. And I insist in each case that our procurement officers are being very proactive in outreach to minority, women-owned businesses, because that is the only way you grow. You need money. Your bank needs cash, investments, deposits. And so that's really the mantra that I adopt in every room that I'm in. And it's not always, often not to benefit me, it's to benefit everyone.
Let's talk about healthcare and the health of healthcare. We talked about some of the change, which is constant. But how do you measure the health of the healthcare industry or of your particular business? What do you use?
It's a good question. Like I said, when we think about the health of the population, we look at infant mortality. But when you think about the industry from a health perspective, there's going through so much change. And we need to be really innovative and creative with driving towards more value and focus on what our consumers really need. And that's something that all of us in businesses really look at. I think the one element that's also coming up quite a bit right now is culture. Because care is provided by people. And we want the people there to provide that compassionate, caring touch every single day. And we need to make sure we continue to invest in our people so that they have the skills, so that they have the ability to take care of their own mental health, so that they can be there for us when we need them. And so we've been doing a lot of investment in our culture across the entire state, talking about who we are, what we stand for, what we're trying to accomplish, and trying to build that up with some resilience and grit, but also making sure that we're creative, that we are curious, that we're listening to each other and listening to our patients and our members to understand what they need. And we're starting to see some of that come through. If I can share one story about some innovation that we're doing. Back 10 years ago, we started telemedicine. We all know it today, but 10 years ago, it was not common. And we had a lot of pushback from our physicians and clinicians, and our patients really didn't know about it. So we asked our physicians if they would, humor us and see if we could try something out. And so we asked a physician to go in a room at the end of the hallway, and we asked the patient to go in the room at the other end of the hallway. And we said, talk to each other virtually. And when they came out, we said, did it work? And the physician said, absolutely. I could do everything from a clinical perspective. I just couldn't shake the patient's hand. And the patient said, doctor, you and I have a great relationship. You saved me 2 hours driving to your office to see you for 15 minutes and then to drive back for 2 hours. I don't need to shake your hand. Right? So then that doctor was our biggest champion, and he started to spread it, and we were really well set up for telemedicine when the pandemic hit. Now today, some of our physicians are pushing telerobotic surgery because we know we need to get to have accessibility, especially in the rural areas. And so we're looking at how do we do telerobotic surgery 500 miles away, and to do it with accuracy and quality. And we're testing the technology, we're testing the broadband to see how do we do that. And it's no longer trying to get the physicians to want to do it. It's now trying to get everything else to come together. And that, to me, is a change in culture of really pushing the limit to say, this is what we can do because we know we need to get equitable, accessible, affordable care out there. And that's what I'm looking at to see how the industry is improving and advancing forward.
We've got a couple of minutes, and I want to go back to the working theme of this conference. And I'm going to throw this out for anybody, jump in wherever you want to. I want to think about the power of and in some kind of particular places. One of the things that we hear a lot about, and it's on one of the themes of the convention here, is civility. How do we use the idea of and to have a more civil discourse? Because one of the things that I think you alluded to, Suzanne, if you're willing to tackle that, is that part of the danger that we face is us if we don't have the ability to be civil and to deal with each other. How do we use and to make that a reality?
You know, I think it's like marriage. It's what we all learned about in premarital counseling. If we aren't both good, the marriage is not good. And I think that's the same, you know, as we deal with different political views. You know, if we can't come to common ground, if we can't compromise, we're going to lose. And so I think active listening, I think Matt mentioned that in his opening remarks, to not, you know, put your thoughts into you know, as someone is talking, hear them, think about it, don't immediately react in a negative manner, really consider. And that's really hard for people to do. We think we know more, you know, than the next person. So, you know, it's really something you really have to work at, I think.
Anybody else? I've got another one. Go
Go
please
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're in a political environment where it's not and or, in a lot of cases, it's nor. And I think we have to demonstrate that we shouldn't tolerate the nor behavior. We embolden it. The names that you probably know of Congress people on the Hill right now don't represent the values of the folks that are in this room who are truly red-blooded Americans who just picket people for the sake of doing that. And as business leaders, I think we have a responsibility to not feed into that frenzy. And if we're going to expect to be what we are capable of becoming, then we're going to have to behave differently. One of my favorite movies is Remember the Titans. And it was not because of the adults. They set the framework and the guideline. If you remember the coaches, they watched the kids figure it out. Julius and Bertier, they figured it out and recognized when they got to strong side, left side, that they were on the same value system. And then they even weeded out their own friends because their value system was stronger than all of their past experiences. And I think that's true for business in general. When we think about how do we create inclusion, we've got to put aside some of the past experiences to be sure that we are engaging in a way to say our core values of why we want to do business with you is something that represents me, and it also represents AB and the rest of the team.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, really what Tina talked about, values, is that's the only way we can retain our employees and attract new talent. So really lean into values. But if I may say so, when I talk civility is, I always look at it from, like to be in somebody else's shoe before I react, right? I mean, people have a certain point of view, but I always think, why do they have that point of view? Because really, there is no solution if it's I win and you lose. There's no solution ever. It's got to be somehow we have to find a way where everybody wins all the time at some level. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And so, but bring back to, if we all have the same values, and I think we all do in the United States, then frankly, we can solve any of the problems. And it's always remembering those values, and I do it, whether HEC, what the values are, what United States, values starts for, liberty, happiness, and those things. If we believe that, I think we can overcome any of those problems.
I think listening is an active dance that you have to do, and you have to make sure that you aren't always listening to respond, but you're listening to engage and find a solution that's a win-win. I think we all have something that's in common, a common purpose, something that we can really relate to, and we need to talk about what's the outcome that we really want to get at, and who are we trying to get it for, and then figure out what the solution is. But sometimes we just jump to something and it's too quick. We probably need more critical thinking. We probably need to slow down. And it's really hard today to slow down when we're so fast and we have our phones attached to us and we need to do so many things. But that art of critical thinking is really important as we get more technology and we get more points of view. We have to think about it.
You know, you said slow down. That reminds me of something the both of you were talking about earlier, and that is people reacting. You talked about the George Floyd situation. You talked about the social media impact after the collapse of those two unique banking experiences. Part of what all of us are up against when it comes to the and making that work is perhaps getting out of our social media silos, because we all have them. And sometimes a popular belief that is inaccurate can be so quickly and widely disseminated to the disservice of all of us. So, and that goes for the news media, by the way, just as clarification. We have, as I predicted, come to the end of this conversation much quicker than I wish we had. So I'm going to start with you, Suzanne. And in 60 seconds or so, tell me what we all should take away and how we can incorporate the power of and in our daily lives, not just on a sunny, beautiful day on Mackinac Island.
Yeah. Well, I do want to add, I think we're all going to be challenged by the Gen Z population right now. They are going to challenge each of us. We're employing them. They care about culture. They care about, diversity and equity. And so, my message will be, and this may not be the question, is listen to that generation, our youth, because they're going to challenge us. They are voting. Our Michigan young people outvoted the rest of the country in the midterm elections. And I think we're going to see great things. That's where I see hope.
The answer, by the way, is whatever you want it to be, and that was a great answer.
Yeah, I would say, again, I fundamentally believe culture determines policies or politics, and those politics determine economics. And to Suzanne's point, right at 3-4 years ago, we created, at that time, a millennial advisory board so we can listen and hear them and understand how we can be really reflective of their values. They renamed themselves the Next Generation Board. See, millennial had become a bad word in a short period of time. And the point is, back to listening, is letting them help shape their own destiny in that regard, and I think that's important. But I would tell you, I'm very proud to be a board member of the Chamber. Having these kinds of conversations are important, and they shouldn't just happen on the island. This is one of those, as unlike Vegas, it needs to go back to all of Michigan. And I would say that we have to continue to have these conversations moving forward about the power of and.
AB?
So my biggest takeaway is that, as having a long-term partnership investment in America's heartland, it gives our nation the chance to lead in the vital industries I talked about, semiconductor and solar energy. And to me, the endeavor is a 30-year, 40-year endeavor. So we better get ready to have a holistic plan to be able to achieve that. And, Hemlock Semiconductor is going to play a role in creating that digital low-energy world. And I'm very optimistic that the long-term investments and long-term commitment will come forward from the state to make that a future reality for us.
Tina, how do we take the power of and beyond Mackinac Island?
I think we need to unlock our potential. All of us have the ability to change the world. And I think in starting the conversations with and what can you do here is really important. I challenge us to be creative to make it even better, and to be bold with what we move forward. We don't need incremental steps. We actually need to move it forward and have the courage to be bold to really make sure that Michigan is a healthy place to be.
Panelists, I cover politics on a daily basis. And just as a side note, every politician, Republican and Democrat that I've talked to, said they love the idea of the power of and. Now let's see if they'll practice it. But it's so refreshing to talk with a group of CEOs that actually care about your business, care about the state and the future, and sharing it with us I thank you all very much for being here. Thank the Chamber for letting me host this. Enjoy your conference, and thank you all for being here.